When I faced my husband and his lover in court, my lawyer said, "Your Honor, we have one more witness." The entire courtroom went dead silent. My chest tightened. "No, it cannot be," I whispered. My husband's smile vanished when he saw who was about to walk in. "My name is Nia. I am 34 years old, and I never thought my life would become a crime scene. I was the owner of a top-tier public relations firm in Atlanta, Georgia. I handled crisis management for celebrities and politicians, yet I could not see the absolute disaster unfolding inside my own marriage. Right now I am standing in the Fulton County courtroom. The heavy mahogany doors are closed, but the air inside is suffocating. Across the aisle sits DeAndre, my soon-to-be ex-husband, wearing the custom Italian suit I bought him for our anniversary. Beside him is Jasmine. She is not just his mistress. She is my sister-in-law, the woman married to DeAndre's own brother. Jasmine sits there with a smug grin, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that I later discovered was purchased with my stolen money. For months, they had dragged my name through the mud. They froze my business accounts. They told the judge I was mentally unstable. They almost got away with taking everything I had built from the ground up. DeAndre is looking at me with that same arrogant smirk he used to manipulate me for years. He thinks he has won. He thinks all the evidence was destroyed in the car crash. But then my attorney Elias Cole stands up. He straightens his tie and looks directly at the judge. "Your Honor, the defense calls our final witness to the stand." The judge frowns, looking over his docket. DeAndre's lawyer objects immediately, claiming there are no more witnesses on the list. Elias just smiles, a cold, calculating smile. "I assure you, Your Honor, this witness is highly relevant to the wire fraud and attempted murder charges." The judge nods and gestures to the bailiff. "Open the doors." DeAndre rolls his eyes, leaning back in his chair, completely unbothered. Jasmine checks her nails. To understand how we ended up in this courtroom, we have to go back 8 months, to the night my perfect life started falling apart. It was a crisp October evening in Atlanta. I was hosting my PR firm's biggest annual charity gala at the Fox Theater. The room was packed with the city's elite. Mayors, professional athletes, and corporate executives filled the room. I had spent 6 months planning every single detail. The champagne was flowing, the crystal chandeliers were glittering, and I was in my element. I wore a stunning emerald green gown, shaking hands, and securing high-dollar donations for a local children's hospital. DeAndre was supposed to be by my side, but he had called earlier that afternoon claiming an emergency meeting with his wealth management clients. I brushed it off. He was always working just like me. We were the ultimate power couple, or so I thought. Toward the end of the evening, the venue manager approached me discreetly. He was an older gentleman named Robert, always polite, but tonight he looked incredibly uncomfortable. He pulled me aside near the grand staircase. "Ms. Nia, I am so sorry to bother you, but there seems to be an issue with the final payment for the catering and floral arrangements." I laughed lightly, waving my hand. "Oh, just run the corporate American Express on file, Robert. I authorized it yesterday." He looked down at his clipboard, his face flushing red. "We did run it, ma'am. 3 times. It was declined." I froze. The music from the ballroom seemed to fade into a dull roar. "That is impossible," I said, keeping my voice low so the nearby guests would not hear. "That account has a limit of $100,000 and the balance is paid in full every month. Please try it again." I watched as he pulled out the mobile terminal and swiped the heavy metal card. A bright red error message flashed on the screen. "Insufficient funds." A cold drop of sweat rolled down my spine. The mayor of Atlanta was standing just 10 feet away from me. My biggest corporate client was at the bar. If word got out that my public relations firm could not even cover its own event costs, my reputation would be ruined overnight. "Excuse me for one moment," I told Robert, maintaining a perfectly composed smile despite the absolute panic rising in my chest. I walked calmly toward the VIP restrooms, nodding at guests along the way. The second the heavy door closed behind me, I locked myself in a marble stall and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in my banking password. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I kept telling myself it was just a bank error. Sometimes fraud prevention triggers on large purchases, especially at evening events. Yes, that had to be it. Just a simple security hold. But the knot in my stomach told a different story. I remembered the odd behaviors DeAndre had been exhibiting over the past few weeks. The late-night phone calls he took in the garage, the sudden password changes on his laptop, the way he would quickly minimize his browser windows whenever I walked into his home office. I had dismissed all of it because I trusted him implicitly. He was my husband, my partner, the man who managed our joint finances because he was the expert. I was the creative force, the communication strategist. He was the numbers guy. We built a life on absolute trust. Now standing in a bathroom stall in a designer gown, that trust felt like a noose around my neck. I opened my banking app, staring at the loading screen as the little circles spun around and around. When the dashboard finally loaded, I had to blink hard. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the dim lighting was playing tricks on me. But the numbers did not change. The balance in my firm's primary operating account was zero. I quickly switched to our joint business savings account. That account was supposed to hold $250,000. It was our safety net, the capital I had saved for the firm's upcoming expansion into the Miami market. The screen showed an available balance of $42.15. $250,000 had completely vanished. I clicked on the transaction history. Earlier that week, there were 3 massive wire transfers, 80,000, 90,000, and 80,000, all sent to an external account under a name I did not recognize. A shell company. My chest heaved. I could not breathe. I was having a full-blown panic attack in a bathroom stall while hundreds of guests waited for me outside. I somehow managed to transfer funds from my personal savings to cover the gala, smiling my way through the rest of the night like a seasoned professional. But the second the event ended, I drove straight home, breaking several speed limits along the way. I burst through the front door of our Buckhead estate. The house was completely dark, except for the glow of the television in the living room. DeAndre was sitting on the leather sofa, sipping a glass of expensive bourbon. He looked up completely relaxed. "Hey, baby? How was the gala?" he asked smoothly. I threw my purse on the kitchen island and marched over to him. "Where is the money, DeAndre?" My voice was shaking with rage. "Where is the $250,000 from the business account?" He did not even flinch. He slowly set his glass down on the coffee table and sighed, looking at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Nia, calm down. I told you I had a meeting today. I was going to explain it to you in the morning." "Explain what?" I yelled. "You drained my accounts." He stood up, towering over me, using that calm, authoritative voice he always used to gaslight me. "The IRS flagged the corporate account for a routine audit regarding your independent contractor classifications. My wealth management team had to move the liquid assets into a temporary escrow holding trust to protect them from being frozen by the federal government. It is a standard protective measure. I am shielding your business, Nia. You should be thanking me." He threw around terms like escrow holding trust and federal audit so smoothly. He made it sound so legitimate, so calculated. He reached out and pulled me into a hug. "I am the wealth manager, baby. Let me handle the finances. You just focus on looking beautiful and running your PR campaigns." I stood there in his arms, smelling the bourbon on his breath. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But my intuition was screaming. The man holding me was not protecting my business. He was robbing me blind. And as I rested my head against his chest, listening to his steady, unbothered heartbeat, I realized my nightmare was only just beginning. The morning sun felt like a spotlight on my exhaustion as I drove into the Buckhead Village District. I had not slept a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that zero balance flashing in neon red. DeAndre had left the house at dawn, claiming he needed to finalize the escrow paperwork to clear up the supposed IRS audit. I needed black coffee and a moment away from the suffocating walls of our estate to clear my head. Buckhead is the kind of neighborhood where wealth is loud but usually tasteful. As I stepped out of my sedan near a high-end boutique, the peace of the morning was shattered by the roar of a massive engine. A brand-new, custom-trim Range Rover autobiography pulled aggressively into the valet lane right in front of me. It was blindingly white, with custom rose gold rims and tinted windows darker than a moonless night. I stopped on the sidewalk holding my coffee cup, watching the valet rush to open the heavy door. Out stepped a woman, wearing oversized designer sunglasses, a head-to-toe Gucci tracksuit, and carrying a crocodile skin handbag that cost more than my first car. She pulled down her sunglasses and my breath caught in my throat. It was Tasha, DeAndre's younger sister. Tasha had not held a steady job since the Obama administration. She was a professional couch surfer who lived in a cramped apartment on the South Side, constantly complaining about her bad luck and asking DeAndre for loans she never repaid. Yet here she was, tossing the keys of a luxury SUV to the valet like she was royalty. She strutted toward the boutique entrance, her acrylic nails tapping against her phone screen, completely oblivious to the world around her. I stood frozen. My mind went back to the 3 wire transfers I saw last night. 80,000, 90,000, 80,000, totaling $250,000. The math hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. DeAndre had claimed my business funds were locked in a protective escrow account, but escrow accounts do not buy custom Range Rovers for unemployed siblings. My blood boiled. For years, I had politely tolerated Tasha's constant financial draining. I had paid her rent when she was evicted. I had bought her groceries. I had even hired her as a receptionist at my PR firm, only to fire her 2 weeks later because she refused to show up on time and spent all day watching videos on her phone. DeAndre always defended her, saying family had to stick together and that I just did not understand their bond because I was too corporate. Now seeing her dripping in luxury while my life's work hung in the balance, the illusion was entirely shattered. I watched her browse the window display of the boutique, admiring her reflection in the glass. She looked incredibly proud of herself, completely unaware of the destruction funding her sudden upgrade. Seeing my stolen money parked in front of me overrode my common sense. I tossed my half-empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can and marched straight toward her. I needed to look her in the eyes and see if she knew exactly where her wealth came from. My body vibrated with a mix of adrenaline and betrayal. I stepped up right behind her as she reached for the boutique door handle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. My mind raced with all the sacrifices I had made to build my business, the late nights, the missed holidays, the relentless grind. And it was all being paraded in front of me by a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life. The disrespect was overwhelming. I clenched my fists, letting the anger sharpen my focus. I would let her know that I saw right through the charade. "Well, look who it is," I said, my voice laced with ice. Tasha spun around. For a fraction of a second, a flash of guilt crossed her face, but she masked it with her signature obnoxious smirk. "Nia, what are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be chained to your desk at that little agency of yours?" I looked her up and down, taking in the designer logos plastered across her chest, and then slowly shifted my gaze to the gleaming white Range Rover in the valet zone. Beautiful car, Tasha. Autobiography edition. Custom rims. That has to be pushing 150 grand. Did you win the lottery, or did a rich uncle pass away? Tasha shifted her weight, crossing her arms defensively, making sure her new diamond watch caught the morning sun. Actually, my brother knows how to take care of his real blood. DeAndre surprised me with it yesterday. He said I deserved a fresh start and a reliable vehicle to get my styling business off the ground. He always says you work too much, Nia. You are always so stressed and busy, you forget how to take care of your man and his family. I guess he finally stepped up to show me the appreciation you never could. The words real blood echoed in my head. My internal monologue raced. A fresh start. A reliable vehicle. She was parroting DeAndre's excuses. He bought this car yesterday, the exact same day my corporate card was declined. The exact same day $250,000 vanished into a phantom account. He had not just stolen from me. He had used my blood, sweat, and tears to finance his sister's ridiculous fantasies, just to stroke his own ego. It was sick. It was a complete violation of everything a marriage was supposed to be. I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space just enough to make her step back. "It is a stunning vehicle, Tasha," I said, keeping my tone terrifyingly calm. "I just hope DeAndre remembered to prepay the premium insurance and the gas for the year. Because a V8 engine gets about 14 miles to the gallon, and those custom rose gold rims cost a fortune to repair when you inevitably scrape them on a curb outside your apartment complex. It would be a real shame if your new reliable vehicle got repossessed next month because you cannot afford the maintenance." Tasha's smirk faltered. Her eyes narrowed into angry slits. "You are just jealous, Nia. You have always been jealous of how close DeAndre and I are. You think your money makes you better than us, but at the end of the day, he chose to bless me. You cannot stand seeing someone else shine." I smiled a cold, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. "Enjoy the ride, Tasha. Just make sure you keep the receipt." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her glaring at my back. I did not need to hear another word. I had my confirmation. The money was not locked in an IRS escrow. It was actively being spent. I drove straight home, bursting through the front door, just as DeAndre was coming down the stairs, dressed in his crisp golf attire. He smiled brightly, acting as if nothing was wrong in the world. "Hey, baby, I thought you went to the office early." I dropped my keys on the console table with a loud clatter that echoed through the massive foyer. "I just ran into Tasha in Buckhead," I said, my voice eerily flat. "She was driving a brand new custom Range Rover. She told me you bought it for her yesterday." DeAndre froze on the bottom step for a split second, but his recovery was absolutely seamless. He let out a heavy sigh and rubbed his temples, adopting the posture of a misunderstood man. "Nia, please, do not start this today. It was a lease. I used my quarterly firm bonus to put down the deposit. Tasha has been struggling and she needed a break. It has nothing to do with your business accounts. Do not lie to me, DeAndre. My accounts were drained yesterday, and today she is driving a luxury SUV. Do you think I am stupid?" He grabbed my shoulders, looking down at me with pity and disappointment. "I think you are paranoid, Nia. I think your stress from the agency is making you delusional. You are constantly attacking my family, always looking for reasons to hate my sister. I am working around the clock to protect your assets from the federal government, and you are accusing me of stealing from my own wife. You are obsessed with money and it is destroying your mind." He shook his head slowly, grabbed his golf clubs, and walked out the front door without another backward glance. He left me standing in the foyer, my heart pounding against my ribs, a wave of self-doubt washing over me. He sounded so convincing, so genuinely hurt by my accusations. For a brief moment, standing alone in that silent house, I actually wondered if I was losing my mind. That self-doubt evaporated by Sunday. Sunday dinner at Mama Estelle's Cascade Heights house was a mandatory weekly ritual. It was supposedly a time for family bonding, but in reality, it was a masterclass in passive aggression and psychological warfare. Walking into her house felt like stepping onto a battlefield armed with sweet tea and fried chicken. The aroma of baked macaroni and cheese, slow-cooked collard greens, and candied yams filled the air, masking the suffocating toxicity that permeated every room. The unspoken hierarchy was carved in stone. Mama Estelle sat at the head of the table ruling her kingdom. DeAndre, her youngest and undeniable golden child, sat to her right. Terrence, the reliable but overlooked older brother, sat further down. Tasha took her usual spot, loudly chewing ice, conveniently forgetting our confrontation. Then there was Jasmine, Terrence's wife. She had recently secured the highest rank a woman could achieve in Mama Estelle's eyes by giving birth to the first male grandchild, little Lucas. And finally, there was me, the outsider. The woman who funded their lavish lifestyles, but was never truly considered one of them because my bank account was larger than my submissiveness. The walls were covered with framed photographs of DeAndre's college graduation and high school sports trophies, while Terrence's architectural degrees were relegated to a dark hallway. This visual favoritism set the stage for everything that happened at this table. The oak table was set with Mama Estelle's fine china to remind everyone of her refined tastes. I sat quietly, pushing glazed ham around my plate with a neutral expression. The constant clinking of heavy silverware against the fine porcelain plates seemed absolutely deafening. Everyone knew I had fired Tasha. Everyone knew my firm caused me tremendous stress. Yet they all played their assigned parts perfectly, acting as if we were the quintessential flawless and happy American family. I was no longer participating in their delusion. I was a spectator observing them with absolute clarity. I watched DeAndre hold court with an exaggerated story, commanding the room with the same charming cadence he used to lie about the IRS audit. He poured expensive Cabernet into crystal glasses, playing the role of the generous provider. The dining room air was thick with unsaid resentment simmering beneath the surface. I took a slow sip of my water, my eyes scanning the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family, realizing for the very first time that I was entirely surrounded by enemies. Mama Estelle dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and turned her full beaming attention toward Jasmine. "Jasmine, baby, this potato salad is absolutely divine," Mama Estelle proclaimed loudly, making sure her voice carried over the jazz playing softly in the background. "You are just a natural homemaker. It brings my heart so much joy to see Terrence married to a real woman who knows her true priorities. A woman who understands that her greatest achievement will never be found in a boardroom, but in raising a strong, healthy son for this family." Jasmine smiled modestly, tucking a perfectly curled strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Mama Estelle. I just believe family always comes first." Some women forget that. The extremely pointed, deliberate silence that immediately followed her statement was heavy enough to crush coal. Mama Estelle slowly shifted her gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing with calculated pity. "Nia, sweetheart, you look absolutely exhausted. I heard through the grapevine that you are practically living at that little agency of yours. Are you sure all that stress is good for your health? A woman's biological clock does not pause just because she wants to play corporate boss. You are 34 years old. Money cannot keep you warm at night, and an empty house is a tragic thing for a married man to come home to." DeAndre did not defend me. He never did. He simply took a sip of his wine and looked at his plate. I forced my face to remain perfectly placid. "My business is doing exceptionally well, Mama Estelle," I replied smoothly. "We are expanding to Miami next quarter. It takes dedication to build generational wealth." Mama Estelle scoffed softly. "Generational wealth is meaningless if you do not have a generation to leave it to. Look at Jasmine. She gave this family little Lucas, and she still manages to look radiant." As if on cue, Jasmine reached across the table to grab the basket of warm cornbread. As her arm extended, the sleeve of her silk blouse slid up, revealing her wrist. The overhead crystal chandelier caught the light, sending a blinding sparkle across the room. Wrapped around Jasmine's wrist was a breathtaking, thick diamond tennis bracelet. The stones were massive and set in a distinct, intricate platinum clasp. My breath hitched. The air left my lungs. Just 3 days ago, while frantically digging through DeAndre's credit card statements, trying to find the missing business funds, I had noticed a bizarre charge. It was an $8,500 transaction at Marcel's Fine Jewelers, an exclusive boutique in Buckhead, known for bespoke platinum clasps. When I had asked DeAndre about it, he claimed it was a corporate gift for a retiring female executive at his firm. He even showed me a fake invoice to prove it. I stared at the bracelet on Jasmine's wrist. The intricate platinum clasp was unmistakable. The $8,500 corporate gift was sitting right in front of me, sparkling on my sister-in-law's wrist. "Oh, Jasmine," Tasha squealed, practically dropping her fork. "That bracelet is gorgeous." "Terrence, you really outdid yourself this time." Terrence paused with his glass halfway to his mouth, a look of genuine confusion washing over his face. He blinked, looking at his wife's wrist as if he was seeing the jewelry for the very first time. "I definitely did not buy that for you," Terrence said slowly. Jasmine pulled her arm back instantly, covering the diamonds with her sleeve. A flash of pure panic crossed her eyes before she let out a loud, unnatural laugh. "Oh, Tasha, you know I have been saving my real estate commission checks," Jasmine lied smoothly. "I decided to treat myself for closing that commercial property last month. A working mom deserves a little reward, right?" I said nothing. I did not need to. I simply watched, while Tasha eagerly demanded to know the carrot size and Mama Estelle nodded in approval at Jasmine's supposed financial independence. My eyes darted to DeAndre. He was sitting rigidly, his knuckles white as he gripped his wine glass. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met Jasmine's across the table. It was not a casual glance. It was a deeply intimate, panicked look of shared guilt. A silent warning to change the subject immediately. Jasmine gave him a microscopic nod, her chest rising and falling rapidly. DeAndre quickly stood up, offering to clear the empty plates, his hand deliberately brushing against Jasmine's shoulder as he reached for her dish. His touch lingered for a second too long. It was a possessive, familiar gesture that made my stomach churn with physical nausea. They were sleeping together. The realization hit me like a freight train. The missing $250,000, the hidden bank accounts, the sudden diamond bracelet, the lingering touches. My husband was not just stealing my money to fund his sister's lifestyle. He was stealing my money to play provider for his brother's wife. Before the heavy silence could swallow me whole, Terrence cleared his throat. He looked at Mama Estelle, his kind face set in a firm protective line. "Mama, you need to stop getting on Nia about having kids," Terrence said, his voice steady and respectful but unwavering. "Nia is building a massive empire. She employs 24 people. She works harder than anyone I know, and she takes incredible care of my brother. DeAndre is lucky to have a partner who is so driven. We should be celebrating her ambition, not tearing it down." I looked at Terrence, my heart breaking into a million jagged pieces. He was so completely sincere. He was a genuinely good man, a devoted father, and a loving brother who always tried to keep the peace. He was sitting there defending my honor to his mother, completely oblivious to the fact that his own wife and his own brother were engaging in a sickening affair right under his nose. He was the only innocent person at this table, and they were playing him for a fool just like they were playing me. The tragedy of his blind loyalty made the impending betrayal infinitely more devastating. I forced a small, grateful smile at Terrence, knowing the storm that was about to destroy his world was already brewing. Dinner finally concluded, and the men rose to move into the living room for the Sunday football game, unaware that the real game had just begun. The television blared from the living room, the familiar sounds of the Sunday night football game providing a loud, distracting soundtrack to the simmering tension. Mama Estelle and Tasha had retreated to the back patio to drink sweet tea and complain about the neighbors, while Jasmine was upstairs putting little Lucas down for a nap in one of the guest bedrooms. I stayed in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing the cast iron skillets, just to have an excuse to avoid making eye contact with anyone. I needed to keep my hands busy so I would not lose my mind. Through the open archway, I could see Terrence and DeAndre sitting on the oversized leather sectional. DeAndre was cheering loudly for the Atlanta Falcons, nursing a fresh glass of bourbon, while Terrence sat quietly, scrolling through his phone. He looked tired. Not the normal exhaustion of a working architect, but the deep, bone-weary fatigue of a man who spent his life trying to please a family that never truly appreciated him. About 20 minutes into the third quarter, the doorbell rang. It was the neighborhood teenager Mama Estelle hired to clean her gutters. Terrence, always the responsible one, stood up with a heavy sigh. "I will get it," he told DeAndre, who barely acknowledged him, his eyes glued to a replay on the screen. Terrence walked into the dimly lit front hallway, where everyone had draped their outerwear over the mahogany coat rack. Terrence and DeAndre both wore long, charcoal gray cashmere overcoats, a Christmas gift Mama Estelle had bought for them 2 years ago. From the kitchen, I watched Terrence reach into the pocket of what he assumed was his own coat to retrieve his wallet to pay the teenager. He dug his hand deep into the right pocket, but instead of pulling out his familiar brown leather wallet, his hand caught on something else. As he pulled his hand out, a small black rectangular object tumbled from the coat and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. Terrence frowned, looking down. He handed a $20 bill to the teenager through the open door, thanked him, and closed it before kneeling to pick up the dropped item. It was a phone, but it was not DeAndre's sleek top-of-the-line company smartphone. It was a cheap plastic prepaid burner phone, the kind you buy with cash at a gas station and throw away when you are done with it. It was the kind of phone a drug dealer or a criminal uses to avoid being tracked. Terrence stood up, turning the cheap device over in his hands. I could see the confusion painting his features. Why would his wealthy image-obsessed brother, a man who refused to be seen wearing last season's shoes, carry a $30 plastic burner phone in his cashmere coat? It made absolutely no sense. He pressed the side button to turn the screen on, likely intending to check if it belonged to the gutter-cleaning teenager, or maybe even one of Tasha's shady boyfriends. As the harsh white light of the cheap screen illuminated Terrence's face in the dark hallway, I stopped scrubbing the skillet. The water kept running, but my attention was completely locked on my brother-in-law. I knew about the missing money, but this burner phone was a brand new piece of the puzzle. Wealth managers handling legal escrow accounts do not use untraceable prepaid phones. This was deliberate, calculated concealment. Terrence stood perfectly still, his thumb hovering over the cracked plastic screen. Before Terrence could even swipe to unlock it, the phone vibrated violently in his palm. A bright notification banner popped up directly on the lock screen. I could not see the screen from where I stood in the kitchen, but I saw the exact moment Terrence's entire universe collapsed. His broad shoulders slumped inward, as if an invisible heavyweight boxer had just driven a devastating blow directly into his stomach. His jaw went slack and all the color instantly drained from his warm brown skin, leaving him looking like a ghost in the hallway shadows. The text message was from a contact saved only by a single initial. The letter J. Attached to the message was a high-resolution photograph. It was an image of little Lucas sleeping peacefully in the upstairs guest bedroom, clutching a blue stuffed elephant. Beneath the photograph was a caption that would forever destroy the foundation of our entire family. The message read, "He has your eyes, D. We cannot keep hiding this." Terrence stared at the words. He read them again and again, his brain desperately trying to reject the horrifying reality presented in bright, glowing pixels. The woman he loved, the wife he cherished, the mother of his only child, was texting his brother. She was calling his brother D. She was confirming that the son Terrence had proudly named after his own grandfather. The son he had rocked to sleep every night for the past year was not his child at all. The boy was DeAndre's. The betrayal was so profound, so layered and grotesque that it physically short-circuited Terrence's body. I watched his hand begin to shake uncontrollably. His chest heaved as his lungs fought for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. He looked up toward the top of the stairs, where Jasmine had disappeared just half an hour ago to put the baby down. Then he looked toward the living room, where the man he had protected and loved his entire life was casually sipping bourbon and laughing at a football game. The diamond bracelet at dinner suddenly made perfect, sickening sense. The lingering glances over the dining table were no longer just inappropriate. They were the arrogant smirks of two people who had pulled off the ultimate deception. Terrence was a proud man, a good man, but in that dark hallway he was completely broken. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, but he managed to catch it before it hit the floor again, gripping the cheap plastic so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He staggered backward, his back hitting the hallway wall with a soft thud. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head side to side in a frantic, silent denial. But the glowing screen in his hand refused to change. The sickening truth remained burned into his vision. The family he thought he had was nothing but a cruel, elaborate lie built on top of his unimaginable humiliation. Terrence stumbled forward, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He bypassed the living room entirely and turned into the kitchen, lunging toward me. He grabbed my forearm with a grip so tight it bruised. "Nia," he gasped, his voice a broken, raspy whisper. "Nia, we have to get out of here. They are playing us. They are playing both of us." He was hyperventilating, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow jerks. I dropped the dish towel, my own heart hammering against my ribs. "Terrence, what is it? What did you find?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. He raised his shaking hand, trying to show me the glowing screen of the burner phone. "The baby Nia. Lucas is not..." Before the sentence could leave his lips, the kitchen doorway darkened. DeAndre stepped into the room. The casual, relaxed posture of the football fan was instantly gone. His eyes darted from Terrence's pale face to the cheap plastic phone trembling in his hand. The air in the kitchen froze, the temperature dropping 100 degrees in a single second. DeAndre's charming facade evaporated completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated menace. It was a predator's gaze, cold and calculating. He did not say a word. He simply stepped forward, his movements terrifyingly smooth, and snatched the burner phone right out of Terrence's hand. Terrence was too paralyzed by shock and heartbreak to resist. "You grabbed my coat by mistake, brother," DeAndre said. His voice was soft, but laced with a lethal warning tone that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He slipped the phone into his pants pocket, holding Terrence's gaze with absolute defiance. Terrence stared at him, tears welling in his eyes, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He wanted to scream, to hit him, to tear the house apart, but he knew Mama Estelle would only take DeAndre's side. Without uttering a single word, Terrence spun around. He marched straight up the stairs, grabbed Jasmine by the arm, picked up the sleeping baby, and walked out the front door into the cold night. I stood frozen in the kitchen, listening to the heavy slam of the front door echoing through the quiet house. DeAndre slowly turned his terrifying empty gaze toward me, offering a chilling, perfect smile. "Just a misunderstanding at work, baby," he lied smoothly, walking back to his game. I did not stay to watch the end of the game. I grabbed my purse, walked out the back door, and drove back to our estate in Buckhead. The silence in my car was deafening, a sharp contrast to the chaotic storm raging in my mind. DeAndre came home hours later. He walked into our bedroom, kissed my forehead like a devoted husband, and climbed into bed. Within 10 minutes, his breathing slowed into a steady, rhythmic pattern. He fell asleep instantly. That is the terrifying thing about true sociopaths. They do not lose sleep over the lives they destroy. I lay awake for hours staring at the vaulted ceiling. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed a sinister red. 2:14 in the morning. My intuition was screaming so loudly it felt like a physical pressure building behind my eyes. Every instinct I had honed as a businesswoman was telling me that I was standing on a trapdoor and DeAndre was about to pull the lever. I slipped out from under the heavy down comforter, grabbed my silk robe, and tiptoed out of the master suite. I went down to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. Just as I raised the glass to my lips, my phone buzzed on the granite counter. The sudden vibration in the dark kitchen made me jump, spilling water down my hand. I looked at the bright screen. It was Terrence calling. I answered immediately, pressing the phone tight against my ear. "Terrence, where are you?" I whispered frantically. The background noise on the line was chaotic. I could hear the roar of a car engine being pushed to its absolute limit, the wind violently whipping against the windows. "Nia, listen to me," Terrence panted. His voice was completely frantic, lacking all of its usual calm, measured tone. I dropped Jasmine and the baby off at her mother's house. I could not look at her. I could not be in the same room with her. I went straight to my architectural office. I needed to know the truth, Nia. I knew DeAndre was careful with his own electronics, but Jasmine is careless. She always uses the same password for everything. I logged into her cloud backup from my secure network. Terrence took a sharp, jagged breath. I could hear his tires gripping the asphalt tightly as he took a sharp turn. "He is draining your company, Nia." DeAndre set up a shell corporation called Apex Heritage Holdings. He registered it in Delaware 3 months ago. I found the incorporation documents saved in a hidden folder on Jasmine's hard drive. He used her maiden name as the registered agent. He is not protecting your assets from an IRS audit. There is no audit. He is systematically liquidating your PR firm's operating capital and funneling it directly into an irrevocable trust attached to that shell company. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles throbbed. The $80,000, $90,000, and $80,000 wire transfers flashed in my mind. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. "He is stealing everything!" Terrence continued, his voice rising in absolute panic. "I found the emails between DeAndre and a shady offshore attorney. He is forging your signature on the authorization forms. He is taking out massive lines of commercial credit against your firm's revenue. Once the accounts are completely drained, he is going to leave you holding the bag for millions of dollars in fraudulent corporate debt. He wants to bankrupt you, Nia. He wants to destroy you so completely that you will never be able to afford a lawyer to fight back. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The scale of his betrayal was incomprehensible. My husband, the man who vowed to protect me, was engineering my total financial execution. I asked him where the money was going. Terrence explained that the trust was designed to be untouchable by marital assets during a divorce. DeAndre was legally moving my hard-earned wealth into a fortress I could not breach. He was using his expertise as a wealth manager not to grow our future, but to meticulously dismantle mine. Terrence sounded like he was on the verge of a panic attack as he described the spreadsheets he had uncovered. He had downloaded the entire financial blueprint, every single fraudulent transaction, every forged document, and every email thread detailing the exact timeline of DeAndre's plan. Terrence had it all saved on an encrypted flash drive. But the money is not even the worst part, Nia Terrence choked out. A raw, guttural sob tore through the phone speaker. It was the sound of a man whose very soul had been shredded into pieces. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from crying out. Terrence, please, I whispered into the darkness. You have to slow down. You are driving way too fast. I cannot slow down, he cried, his voice breaking entirely. I saw the DNA results, Nia. Jasmine had a digital copy saved in that same hidden folder. It was dated a week before Lucas was born. The paternity test. DeAndre paid for it using a prepaid debit card, but the results were sent directly to Jasmine's email. Lucas is his son. My brother fathered a child with my wife, and they let me name him after our grandfather. They let me wake up at 3 in the morning to feed him. They let me fall completely in love with a child that was created from their sick, twisted affair. Tears streamed down my face. The absolute depravity of what DeAndre and Jasmine had done was beyond human comprehension. They had humiliated Terrence in the most fundamental way a man could be humiliated. And DeAndre was stealing my money to fund their new life together. Terrence warned me that DeAndre was planning to serve me with divorce papers by the end of the month. Right after the final credit line was approved, they were going to take my money, take the baby, and leave us both with absolutely nothing. He was going to use my own money to fight me in court and leave me drowning in legal fees and corporate debt. I listened to Terrence weeping as he drove the harsh reality settling into my bones. He told me that Jasmine had been complaining in her emails about living in a house I had helped them furnish. DeAndre had promised her that the shell company would purchase a multi-million-dollar estate in Miami, entirely funded by my PR agency's stolen revenue. They were building their dream life on the ashes of our marriages. They had turned our love, our trust, and our family loyalty into a weapon stabbing us in the back while smiling in our faces at Sunday dinner. I am coming to your house right now, Terrence said, his voice suddenly hardening with a terrifying resolve. I have the flash drive with everything on it, all the proof we need to put both of them in federal prison. I am 10 minutes away. Make sure DeAndre is asleep. Meet me in the driveway. I will be ready. I told him, my own tears drying as pure, unadulterated rage took over my body. Drive safely, Terrence. I will see you in a few minutes. I pulled the phone away from my ear to hang up, but Terrence's voice suddenly spiked into a frantic, panicked yell. Nia, something is wrong. I pressed the phone back to my ear. What is it? What is happening? My brakes. Terrence screamed, the sheer terror in his voice, vibrating through my bones. I am pressing the brake pedal all the way down to the floorboard, but the car is not slowing down. The pedal is completely loose. Nia, the brakes are entirely gone. A cold spike of absolute horror drove itself through my chest. Terrence pulled the emergency brake. Steer into the embankment. Do it now. I am trying, he yelled over the deafening roar of the accelerating engine. It is not engaging. Oh my God. The intersection. There is a huge truck. Terrence, I screamed into the darkness of my kitchen. Mid-sentence, Terrence let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound that followed will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. The violent, ear-splitting shriek of tires burning against asphalt, instantly followed by the deafening explosion of shattering glass and the horrific crunching impact of heavy metal twisting and snapping under massive force. The sheer violence of the crash blasted through the tiny speaker. Then the line went completely dead. Absolute terrifying silence. I stood frozen in this dark kitchen, the dead phone still pressed against my ear. The terrifying silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, before my brain finally registered the catastrophe that had just occurred. I dropped the glass of water. It shattered against the hardwood floor, but I did not care. I sprinted back upstairs, threw on sweatpants over my silk robe, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door. I drove like a mad woman through the empty streets of Atlanta. My mind was racing with horrific images of twisted metal and shattered glass. I dialed Terrence's number over and over again, but it went straight to voicemail every single time. It took the police over an hour to locate the wreckage and notify the family. The call directed us to Grady Memorial Hospital, the premier trauma center in the city. When I burst through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, the chaotic energy of the hospital hit me like a physical wall. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Nurses and doctors sprinted down the linoleum corridors, pushing gurneys and shouting medical codes I did not understand. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol made my stomach churn violently. I ran to the reception desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely spell Terrence's last name for the triage nurse. She gave me a sympathetic, terrifying look and pointed toward the surgical waiting area. I found the lead trauma surgeon and a police officer standing near the double doors of the intensive care unit. The surgeon delivered the devastating news with a somber clinical detachment that made my blood run cold. Terrence had suffered massive head trauma. The impact of the collision had caused severe brain swelling. He was completely unresponsive at the scene and had to be intubated immediately. They had placed him in a medically induced coma to try and relieve the pressure on his brain. But the prognosis was incredibly grim. The surgeon refused to promise he would ever wake up. My knees buckled. I leaned against the cold, cinder-block wall to keep from collapsing. That is when the police officer stepped forward, holding a small notepad. He adjusted his utility belt and cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are you the sister-in-law? We are still investigating the scene, but based on the preliminary evidence, it looks like a textbook case of driving under the influence. The vehicle was traveling at nearly 90 miles per hour before it struck the concrete embankment. There were no skid marks, which indicates he did not even try to hit the brakes. We found a shattered bottle of bourbon in the passenger footwell. The smell of alcohol was overpowering inside the cabin. I stared at the officer, absolute disbelief washing over me. "No," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "That is completely impossible. Terrence has been sober for 5 years. He does not touch alcohol. He goes to meetings every single week. He called me right before the crash. He told me his brakes were gone. Someone cut his brakes." The officer gave me that condescending, pitiful look authorities often reserve for grieving family members who are in denial. "Ma'am, trauma makes people look for someone to blame. Alcoholics relapse all the time, especially when they are dealing with personal stress. The physical evidence points to a drunk driving accident. We will run the toxicology report, but right now there is no evidence of foul play." He closed his notepad, offering a stiff nod before walking away. I was left standing alone in the hallway, suffocating under the weight of a massive calculated lie. They had framed him. DeAndre had planted the bourbon. Before I could chase after the officer to demand a full mechanical inspection of the vehicle, the elevator doors at the end of the hallway chimed open. Mama Estelle, DeAndre, and Jasmine spilled out into the waiting room. What happened next was a performance so flawlessly executed it belonged on a movie screen. Jasmine immediately collapsed into DeAndre's arms, wailing at the top of her lungs. Her cries echoed off the sterile walls, a high-pitched theatrical sobbing that drew the attention of every nurse and patient in the vicinity. She buried her face into DeAndre's shoulder, clutching his shirt with trembling hands. "Oh my God, Terrence!" she screamed, her voice cracking perfectly. "My poor husband, what am I going to do without him? How am I going to raise our baby alone?" DeAndre held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering comforting words, playing the role of the strong, supportive brother. Mama Estelle was clutching her chest, praying loudly to Jesus, completely buying into the tragic spectacle. I watched them with pure disgust. Less than 2 hours ago, Jasmine was texting DeAndre that they could no longer hide their affair. Less than 2 hours ago, DeAndre had sabotaged his own brother's car to silence him permanently. And now they were standing in a hospital waiting room, milking the tragedy for every ounce of sympathy they could extract. It was deeply fundamentally evil. I ignored their sickening display and walked straight toward the double doors of the intensive care unit. I needed to see Terrence. I needed to see if he was still breathing, if he was still fighting. I pushed the heavy door open, but before I could take 3 steps down the restricted corridor, a firm hand grabbed my arm. It was a charge nurse, her expression stern and apologetic. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, stepping in front of me to block my path. "Only immediate family and the designated next of kin are allowed in the ICU trauma bay right now. The patient is in critical condition." I pulled my arm away, my heart pounding. "I am family. He is my brother-in-law. I need to see him. Just for a minute." The nurse shook her head. "I am sorry. The patient's wife has explicitly requested that no one except herself and the patient's mother be allowed inside the room. She stated that you were causing her severe emotional distress and formally asked security to keep you out of the patient's area." I spun around. Jasmine had stopped wailing. She was standing a few feet away, her eyes dry and terrifyingly cold. She wiped a fake tear from her cheek and stepped forward, flanked by DeAndre. "She is right, Nia," Jasmine said, her voice dropping its hysterical pitch to a calm, authoritative tone. "I am his wife. I hold his medical power of attorney. This is a very sensitive time for our family, and Terrence needs peace. You have always brought too much drama into this family. I will not let you disturb him while he is fighting for his life. You need to leave." I clenched my fists so hard my fingernails bit into my palms. "You lying, manipulative snake," I hissed, stepping toward her. "You do not care if he lives or dies. You are the reason he was out on that road in the first place." Jasmine dramatically gasped and stepped behind DeAndre, cowering as if I had physically struck her. DeAndre immediately stepped between us, puffing out his chest. "Nia, back off right now," DeAndre commanded, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "You are entirely out of line. My brother is lying in a coma, and you are attacking his grieving wife. Security is going to escort you out if you cannot control your psychotic outbursts." He turned to the charge nurse, flashing his most charming, persuasive smile despite the grim circumstances. "I am so sorry for her behavior. My brother had some personal belongings recovered from the crash site: his briefcase, his laptop, and his keys. As the family's financial advisor, I need to secure those items immediately to ensure his business operations are not compromised during his incapacitation." The nurse nodded sympathetically and handed DeAndre a large, clear plastic hospital belongings bag. Inside, I could see Terrence's leather briefcase, his cracked smartphone, and his silver keychain. The flash drive, the encrypted drive containing every single piece of evidence proving DeAndre's massive financial fraud and the truth about Jasmine's baby, was inside that briefcase. My stomach plummeted as DeAndre wrapped his long fingers around the plastic bag. He looked at me, a microscopic, victorious smirk playing on his lips. He knew exactly what he was holding. He was using his brother's horrific tragedy to confiscate the only evidence that could destroy him. "I will take care of everything," Terrence DeAndre whispered, feigning a choked sob for the nurse's benefit. He secured the bag tightly under his arm. They had legally blocked me from the room and stolen the proof right in front of the authorities. They thought they had won. But as I watched them walk away to play the victims, the shock finally wore off, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I knew what I had to do next. I walked out of the hospital into the freezing night air. DeAndre had Terrence's briefcase, which meant he had the primary encrypted flash drive. He thought he had completely neutralized the threat and successfully buried the truth. But DeAndre was an arrogant man, and arrogant men always make fatal mistakes when they believe they are untouchable. Terrence had explicitly told me over the phone that he had hacked into Jasmine's laptop from the secure network at his architectural firm. Knowing Terrence, a man who meticulously backed up every single blueprint and schematic in triplicate to protect his clients, there was absolutely no way he would leave the only copy of such explosive life-altering evidence in a leather briefcase. There had to be a secondary backup at his office. DeAndre would realize this eventually. As soon as the sun came up and the corporate banks opened, DeAndre would hire a forensic IT specialist to wipe Terrence's entire server clean and destroy the digital footprint. I had less than 4 hours to beat him to it. I got into my car and locked the heavy doors, my mind racing through the logistics. Terrence's firm was located in a renovated brick loft building in Midtown Atlanta. Security there was notoriously tight. They had electronic keypads, heavy deadbolts, and monitored alarm systems. But I had a secret weapon that DeAndre did not know about. 3 years ago, when Terrence first opened his independent practice, I had managed his grand opening publicity campaign pro bono to help him get off the ground. During those late nights of preparing press kits and coordinating catering, Terrence had given me a physical master key to the back alley service door. He told me to keep it on my keychain for emergencies. I had shoved it into the bottom compartment of my center console and promptly forgotten about it for years. Until tonight. I tore through the console, tossing old parking receipts, breath mints, and spare change aside until my trembling fingers brushed against cold, heavy brass. I pulled it out, gripping it so tightly the jagged edges dug painfully into my palm. It was 2:20 in the morning. The streets of Atlanta were completely deserted, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. I drove toward Midtown with a singular, laser-focused mission. I was no longer the heartbroken wife or the grieving sister-in-law crying in a hospital corridor. I was a woman fighting for my absolute survival. I parked my car 2 blocks away from the firm, pulling into the deep shadows of a closed parking garage. I did not want my license plate caught on any street cameras near the building. I walked the rest of the way on foot, sticking to the dark, narrow alleys, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The cold wind bit sharply at my face, but I barely felt it. Every single step brought me closer to the evidence that would either save my life or seal my financial destruction. I reached the heavy steel service door at the back of the brick building. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I slid the brass key into the lock. I held my breath, praying the locks had not been changed since the grand opening. The cylinder turned with a heavy, satisfying metallic click. I pushed the door open, slipped inside into the pitch-black darkness, and quietly pulled the heavy steel shut behind me. The interior of the architectural firm was terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the low, rhythmic, mechanical hum of the central heating system kicking on in the ceiling vents. I kept the overhead lights completely off, knowing the large floor-to-ceiling windows facing the main street would easily broadcast my presence to anyone outside. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen brightness all the way down, using the faint bluish glow to navigate through the complex labyrinth of drafting tables and modern cubicles. The shadows stretched and twisted across the exposed brick walls, making every tall coat rack look like a person standing silently in the dark. My pulse pounded in my ears like a war drum. I crept down the main hallway toward Terrence's private corner office at the far end of the floor. The heavy glass door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it gently behind me to muffle any sound. I shined my phone light across his massive oak desk. It was completely cleared off. The docking station where he usually kept his high-powered architectural laptop was entirely empty. DeAndre had not just taken the briefcase from the hospital waiting room. He must have sent someone or come here himself earlier in the evening to clear out the primary hardware before heading to Grady Memorial. Panic began to rise in my throat, hot, bitter, and suffocating. If the laptop was already gone, maybe the backups were gone too. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I closed my eyes and tried to think exactly like Terrence. Terrence was an old-school architect. He thought in terms of structural integrity, hidden foundations, and redundancy. He absolutely despised cloud storage for his most sensitive projects because he did not trust third-party servers with his intellectual property. He always kept a hard physical copy of his most important files, somewhere safe in his physical proximity. I began to tear the office apart, moving with frantic, desperate precision. I checked the tall metal filing cabinets, but they were locked tight and I did not have the key. I searched the expansive bookshelf, pulling down heavy volumes on modern design and urban planning, hoping a small drive was tucked behind them. Nothing. I dropped to my knees and checked behind the heavy oak desk, running my hands along the baseboards and feeling for loose wooden panels. Still nothing. The digital clock glowing on the wall flashed 3:15. Time was running out fast. DeAndre could have hired a hacker working remotely at this very second to wipe the remaining network drives from afar. I stood up, sweeping my dim phone light across the room one last time in pure desperation. My eyes landed on Terrence's secondary workstation situated in the far corner of the office. It was a massive vintage wooden drafting table that he used specifically for hand-drawing intricate blueprints. He loved that table. It was the only piece of furniture he had brought over from his very first cramped apartment. I walked over to it, my heart lodged firmly in my throat. I ran my hands over the smooth, slanted wooden surface. I checked the small supply drawers. They were empty except for drafting pencils and expensive architectural erasers. I was about to give up and leave when a distinct memory flashed in my mind. Years ago, Terrence had joked during a dinner party that the absolute best place to hide something valuable was where nobody would ever want to reach their hands. I dropped to the floor, sliding onto my back, and shined my phone light directly up at the underside of the heavy wooden drafting table. The wood was rough, splintered, and unfinished underneath. But right in the dead center, secured tightly by two thick strips of heavy black electrical tape, was a small silver external solid-state hard drive. A wave of pure absolute relief washed over my entire body. I reached up my fingers, desperately peeling back the stubborn sticky tape. It took a few agonizing seconds of pulling, but the drive finally dropped squarely into the palm of my hand. It was cold and heavy. This was it. The fraudulent financial records, the forged signature documents, the DNA test, proving DeAndre fathered Jasmine's child, the entire blueprint of their sick betrayal. I had it. I gripped the drive tightly, pressing it against my chest, feeling a triumphant, breathless smile break through the sheer terror. I had finally outsmarted them. I slipped the silver hard drive deep into the front pocket of my sweatpants, pushing it down safely. I turned off my phone screen, plunging the office back into total darkness, and began to make my way back toward the heavy glass door. I took exactly 3 steps before the entire building erupted in blinding, violent light. The overhead fluorescent bulbs slammed on all at once, searing my retinas. Before I could even raise my arm to shield my face, a booming, authoritative voice echoed aggressively through the hallway. "Atlanta Police Department. Keep your hands exactly where I can see them. Drop to the floor right now." I froze in absolute paralyzing terror. 3 heavily armed police officers were standing squarely in the doorway of Terrence's office, their heavy tactical flashlights trained directly on my face, their hands resting menacingly on their holstered weapons. I slowly raised my hands above my head, my mind completely short-circuiting. How did they get here so fast? I had not tripped any electronic alarms. I used the physical brass key. "Do it now!" the lead officer screamed, stepping forward with his weapon half drawn. I dropped to my knees, the hard commercial flooring biting into my skin, and laid flat on my stomach, spreading my arms out. Rough, unyielding hands grabbed my wrists, instantly yanking them violently behind my back with brutal force. The freezing cold steel of the handcuffs snapped tightly around my wrists, biting sharply into my flesh. "You are under arrest for commercial burglary and trespassing," the officer stated coldly, hauling me up to my feet by my arms. I looked up, completely disoriented and dizzy, and that is when I saw it. A small, discreet, wireless security camera mounted high in the corner of the ceiling, a tiny red recording light blinking steadily in the harsh lighting. Jasmine. While DeAndre was always focused on the big picture and the finances, Jasmine was deeply paranoid and meticulous about her surroundings. She had retained access to the firm's remote security camera feeds on her phone. She knew my personality. She knew I would not just give up and go home to sleep after being legally blocked at the hospital. She had been watching the live cameras from her phone in the hospital waiting room, just waiting for me to walk right into her trap. She had called the police and reported a break in the exact moment I opened the alley door. The officers pushed me forward, roughly marching me out of the office and down the brightly lit main hallway. I was shoved out the front glass doors of the building into the freezing night air. A marked squad car was waiting aggressively at the curb, its red and blue lights spinning violently, painting the surrounding brick walls in a chaotic, terrifying strobe effect. Neighbors from the adjacent luxury lofts were looking out their windows at the commotion. I was being paraded out into the street, like a common criminal stripped of my dignity, my public relations business, and my personal freedom. The officer pushed my head down to protect it and shoved me roughly into the hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser. The heavy doors slammed shut, locking me inside a cramped, suffocating cage. They thought they had won this round flawlessly. But as the police car pulled away from the curb carrying me toward the downtown county jail, I shifted my weight in the uncomfortable, rigid seat. I could feel the cold, hard rectangle of the silver hard drive pressing safely against my thigh, completely undetected and hidden deep inside my pocket. They had me locked in handcuffs in the back of a police car, but they had no idea I held their entire life sentence right in my pocket. The county jail holding cell was a terrifying nightmare of gray concrete walls, blinding fluorescent lights, and the overwhelming stench of industrial bleach mixed with pure human despair. I sat on a freezing metal bench, pulling my thin uniform jacket tightly around my trembling shoulders. When I first arrived during the chaotic midnight intake process, the female guard had been distracted by a violent altercation between two other inmates. She had quickly patted me down, completely missing the small silver hard drive tucked deep into the fleece lining of my sweatpants pocket. Knowing a more thorough search or a transfer to a permanent cell block was imminent by morning, I knew I had to act fast. I asked the guard to use the privacy partition. Shielded from the surveillance cameras for just a few precious seconds, I slipped the heavy drive out of my pocket. I jammed it forcefully beneath the thick arch support insert of my left sneaker, pushing it down until it was completely hidden from view. It was incredibly uncomfortable, pressing sharply into the tender sole of my foot, but it was safe from their hands. I spent the next 9 agonizing hours, wide awake, shivering violently, and listening to the terrifying echoes of slamming iron doors. By 10 in the morning, my name was finally called over the loud intercom. A guard escorted me down a long, sterile concrete corridor to the main release processing room. Standing firmly at the front desk, looking entirely out of place, in a sea of exhausted public defenders and weeping relatives, was Elias Cole. Elias was a legal shark in a bespoke 3-piece suit. He was a highly feared former federal prosecutor who had built a massive reputation for being absolutely ruthless in the courtroom. I knew him well because my public relations firm had successfully managed a brutal media fallout for one of his corporate clients a few years ago. I had used my one permitted phone call to wake him up at dawn, promising him double his usual retainer if he got me out of this nightmare. He looked me up and down with clinical detachment as the guard unlocked my heavy steel cuffs. "You look terrible," Nia Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant respect from everyone in the room. "Let us get you out of here before the district attorney decides to process that felony trespassing upgrade." I grabbed my personal belongings from the plastic intake tray, my hands still shaking uncontrollably. "How did you get the duty judge to sign off on bail so fast?" I asked, matching his brisk pace as we walked out through the heavy double-glass doors into the blinding mid-morning sunlight. "I did not ask." The judge, Elias replied coldly, unlocking the doors to his sleek black town car parked at the curb. "I simply reminded the district attorney that I still possess the sealed financial files from his messy divorce 3 years ago. The charges are currently pending further review, which means you are free to go for now. But you need to tell me exactly what you were doing breaking into a midtown architectural firm at 2 in the morning. I slid into the luxurious leather passenger seat, the hard drive pressing reassuringly against the bottom of my foot. I took a deep breath. "I am going to tell you everything, Elias. But first I need you to take me home. I need to change my clothes and figure out my next move." Elias put the heavy car in drive. His sharp, calculating eyes studied me intensely in the rearview mirror. Whatever dangerous game you are playing, Naya, you are already losing it badly. The police report explicitly stated your sister-in-law tipped them off with remote camera access. This is a bitter family dispute bleeding heavily into criminal law. Those are always the most dangerous cases. You need to brace yourself because whoever set you up tonight is absolutely not finished yet. The drive to Buckhead took 20 agonizing minutes. When Elias pulled his town car up to the wrought iron gates of my massive estate, my stomach instantly dropped. The electronic gate code did not work at all. Elias had to use the intercom to request entry, but the line was completely disconnected. I got out of the car and walked up to the pedestrian side gate, forcing it open manually. I marched up the long, sweeping driveway, the expensive gravel crunching loudly under my sneakers. As I approached the grand double front doors, I reached into my bag for my house keys. I slid my gold key into the heavy brass deadbolt and turned it. It jammed solidly. I pulled it out and tried again, jiggling the handle frantically. The lock had been completely replaced. The brass was shiny and new, entirely different from the antique hardware I had picked out myself. Before I could fully process what this meant, the front door swung open. DeAndre stood in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a casual navy blazer and crisp white shirt, looking as fresh and relaxed as if he had just returned from a pleasant morning at the country club. Standing right beside him was a short, balding man, carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was DeAndre's aggressive divorce attorney. "Ah, Nia, you made bail," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with fake polite concern. "I am so relieved. We were terribly worried you might be a danger to yourself after last night's psychotic episode." I stared at him, my jaw tight. "What did you do to the locks?" "DeAndre, let me into my house right now." DeAndre sighed heavily, looking at his lawyer with a practiced expression of exhausted sadness. "This is exactly the erratic behavior I was talking about, Arthur. She is completely out of control." The balding lawyer stepped forward, pulling a massive stack of legal documents from his briefcase and thrusting them directly into my chest. I reflexively grabbed the heavy stack before it hit the ground. "Nia, you are officially being served," the lawyer stated in a sharp, nasal voice. "These are divorce proceedings initiated by your husband. Attached is a temporary emergency restraining order signed by a Fulton County judge an hour ago. You are legally required to remain at least 500 feet away from this residence, from DeAndre, and from his immediate family, which includes Jasmine and her child." I flipped through the thick pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. My heart hammered violently against my ribs as I read the third document. It was a court-ordered financial injunction. They had completely frozen my public relations firm's operating accounts. DeAndre had filed a sworn affidavit claiming I was exhibiting severe criminal behavior, citing my midnight arrest as absolute proof that I was mentally unstable and a flight risk who might embezzle corporate funds. He had legally paralyzed my entire company in a single morning. "You cannot do this," I yelled, the raw desperation leaking into my voice. "This is my house. I paid the mortgage. That is my company. I built it from the ground up with my own hands. You are stealing my entire life." DeAndre shook his head, playing the wounded victim flawlessly for his attorney. "You broke into my brother's office while he is fighting for his life in a coma, Nia. You are mentally unwell. I have to protect the family assets from your destructive spiral. I have already arranged for a moving company to box up your personal clothing. They will deliver it to a cheap motel downtown by this evening. You are no longer welcome here." The lawyer checked his expensive gold watch and stepped back into the grand foyer, leaving DeAndre standing alone on the threshold. The second his attorney was completely out of earshot, DeAndre's pathetic victim facade vanished entirely. He stepped out onto the porch, invading my personal space, towering over me with cold malice. The smell of his expensive cologne made my stomach violently churn. He leaned down, his mouth hovering just inches from my ear. His voice was a venomous, terrifying whisper that chilled me down to the marrow of my bones. "I told you to let me handle the finances, baby," he whispered smoothly, relishing every single syllable. "You thought you were so smart, running your little business, looking down on my sister, acting like you were the absolute queen of this family. Now look at you. You are a convicted felon in dirty sweatpants standing on my porch. I am going to take your company. I am going to take this beautiful house. I am going to leave you with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and a massive mountain of legal debt. You are completely finished, Nia. Do not ever cross me again. He pulled back, gave me one final arrogant smirk, and slammed the heavy front door directly in my face. The loud final click of the deadbolt locking echoed across the empty porch. I stood there, clutching the massive stack of divorce papers completely stripped of my home, my money, and my power. I was locked out of my own life. But as I turned around to walk back down the long driveway toward Elias Cole's waiting car, I shifted my weight. The sharp, hard edge of the silver hard drive pressed firmly into the sole of my left foot. He thought he had left me with absolutely nothing. He had no idea I was walking away with the only weapon that would permanently destroy his entire world and put him in federal prison. I slid into the passenger seat of Elias Cole's town car and immediately removed my left sneaker. Elias raised an eyebrow as I reached inside and pulled out the small silver solid-state drive. I held it up the morning sun, catching its metallic edge. DeAndre thinks he took everything I said, my voice finally steady after a night of pure terror. But he left the only thing that actually matters. Elias stared at the drive, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Let us go to my office," he said, shifting the heavy car into gear. Elias's law firm occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. The space was an intimidating fortress of polished mahogany floor-to-ceiling windows and absolute discretion. I sat in his private conference room, still wearing my dirty jail sweatpants, drinking black coffee while we waited. Elias had immediately called his lead forensic IT specialist, a quiet, meticulous man named David who arrived within 20 minutes carrying a heavy metal briefcase of decryption tools. David connected the drive to an air-gapped laptop completely isolated from the internet to prevent any remote wiping protocols DeAndre might employ. The room was completely silent except for the rapid clicking of David's keyboard. Terrence was a brilliant architect, which meant his encryption standards were incredibly high. He had locked the partition with a military-grade cipher. It took David nearly an hour of running specialized brute force algorithms before the progress bar finally hit 100%. The screen flashed a brilliant green. "We are in," David announced softly, stepping back from the monitor. Elias and I leaned over the table, staring at the illuminated screen. Terrence had organized everything with the same flawless precision he used to design skyscrapers. There was a master folder labeled simply Apex Heritage Holdings. I reached out with a trembling hand and double-clicked the mouse. The screen instantly populated with hundreds of PDF documents, scanned bank statements, and intricate Excel spreadsheets. It was a complete, irrefutable roadmap of my husband's massive financial crimes. We opened the bank ledgers first. Seeing the numbers laid out in black and white made the betrayal feel entirely tangible. DeAndre had systematically forged my signature on multiple commercial loan applications, borrowing millions of dollars against the projected revenue of my public relations firm. He had funneled that capital, along with the $250,000 he drained from my operating accounts, directly into a corporate shell entity registered in Delaware. But the most sickening discovery was the final destination of my money. Elias opened a scanned legal document titled the Lucas Heritage Trust. It was an irrevocable trust fund, a bulletproof financial vehicle designed to be completely shielded from any future divorce asset division. I read the names listed on the document, my stomach violently churning. The primary beneficiary was Lucas, Jasmine's 1-year-old son. The sole trustee with complete discretionary control over the funds was Jasmine herself. And the primary funder of the trust, legally bound by forged documents, was my public relations company. DeAndre had not just stolen my money. He had meticulously orchestrated a plan to use my life savings, my credit, and my business to permanently fund a lavish lifestyle for his mistress and his illegitimate son. He was effectively forcing me to pay child support for a baby created from his disgusting affair with his own sister-in-law. He had robbed me of my present to buy them a luxurious future. Elias crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the forged signatures with the analytical gaze of a former federal prosecutor. "This is a masterpiece of corporate fraud," Elias murmured, his voice laced with cold professional admiration. "Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and massive perjury. If we hand this to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, DeAndre is looking at a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison just for the forged commercial loans. We have him, Nia. He is completely dead in the water." I let out a shaky breath, a tear of pure vindication sliding down my cheek. I wanted to celebrate, to scream in triumph, but David suddenly leaned back over the keyboard, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Hold on a second," David said, his fingers flying across the keys again. "There is a hidden secondary partition inside the main folder. It is a massive file size. It looks like high-definition video data." Elias and I exchanged a confused look. "What kind of video data?" Elias asked, his tone sharpening instantly. David rapidly executed a string of commands to bypass the secondary lock. Terrence had a top-of-the-line aftermarket security system installed in his sedan. It is a cloud-synced dashcam system that records the front, rear, and interior of the vehicle, but it also has a motion-activated parking mode. This folder contains the raw, downloaded media files from the camera's local storage buffer. Terrence must have pulled these directly from the dashcam SD card yesterday afternoon. David double-clicked the most recent video file. It was timestamped at 3:15 in the afternoon, just hours before our toxic Sunday dinner and only 9 hours before Terrence's catastrophic crash. The video player popped up, displaying a crystal-clear, high-definition view from the front windshield of Terrence's parked car. The vehicle was parked inside the detached garage at Mama Estelle's house. The lighting was dim, but the camera's night vision sensors captured everything in stark, terrifying detail. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the heavy wooden side door of the garage slowly creaked open. A figure stepped into the frame. It was DeAndre. He was wearing dark jeans and a plain black hooded sweatshirt, a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. He was carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. My breath caught in my throat, my eyes glued to the screen as my husband casually walked to the front of Terrence's car. He looked around the empty garage, completely unaware that the tiny lens mounted behind the rearview mirror was recording his every single move. DeAndre unzipped the tool bag and pulled out a pair of heavy wire cutters and a small wrench. Then he laid down on the concrete floor and slid his upper body entirely underneath the front driver's side wheel well of Terrence's car. The camera angle could not show his hands, but the audio picked up everything. The sharp metallic clinking of a wrench turning a bolt. A sudden, pressurized hiss of fluid leaking onto the concrete floor. The distinct, terrifying sound of heavy metal cables being brutally snapped in half. "No," I whispered, pressing my hands over my mouth. "Oh my God, no." DeAndre spent exactly 4 minutes under the car. When he finally slid out, his hands were covered in dark, viscous brake fluid. He calmly wiped his hands on an old shop towel, tossed the tools back into his canvas bag, and stood up. He looked directly toward the windshield. The camera captured his face perfectly. He was not sweating. He was not panicked. He had a cold, empty, dead expression in his eyes. The expression of a true sociopath who had just signed his own brother's death warrant. He turned off the garage light and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. The video ended, freezing on the black screen. The silence in the conference room was absolutely deafening. I felt completely physically sick. My mind flashed back to Sunday dinner. DeAndre had sat at that dining room table drinking expensive wine, laughing and eating Mama Estelle's food, knowing perfectly well that he had just rigged his brother's car to become a deadly weapon. He knew Terrence was driving home. He knew Terrence might put the baby in that car. He did not care. He had orchestrated the entire thing to eliminate the only person who had discovered his twisted secrets. The crash was not an accident caused by sudden brake failure. It was a highly calculated, cold-blooded execution. And the police finding that shattered bottle of bourbon in the footwell proved that DeAndre had planned the cover-up, meticulously framing his sober brother as a reckless drunk driver to ensure no one would ever question the mechanical failure. Elias slowly stood up from his leather chair. The smug, confident demeanor of the corporate lawyer was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying, lethal intensity of a former federal prosecutor looking at a capital crime. I watched his jaw clench tightly as he stared at the frozen black screen. "This completely changes the game," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. Fraud is a white-collar crime. But this is premeditated attempted murder. We are no longer just going to take your company back, Nia. We are going to bury this man under the federal penitentiary. I grabbed Elias by his expensive wool suit sleeve. Call the police right now. I demanded, my voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and rage. We have the video. We have the motive. Have them arrest DeAndre today before he can hurt anyone else. Elias gently but firmly removed my hand from his arm. He walked to the oak table and closed the laptop, deliberately breaking my line of sight with the horrific video. Sit down, Nia, he ordered. I do not want to sit down. I shouted, the trauma finally boiling over. He tried to kill his own brother. He framed him for drunk driving. He is stealing my entire life. We have the proof right here. Elias slammed his hand flat against the table. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, instantly silencing me. Listen to me carefully, he said, his eyes locking onto mine with the intense focus of an apex predator. If I call the local police right now, DeAndre will be arrested for attempted murder. He will immediately post a massive cash bail using your stolen money. The second he walks out of that precinct, he will execute a wire transfer, move every single dime of your company's capital into untraceable offshore accounts, and hop on a private charter jet to a country without an extradition treaty. You will get the satisfaction of seeing him in handcuffs for exactly 1 hour, and then you will spend the rest of your life bankrupt while he lives like a king on a tropical beach. I sank slowly into the leather executive chair, the harsh reality of his words hitting me like physical blows. So what do we do? I whispered, feeling the crushing weight of my own powerlessness. We let him get away with it. We do the exact opposite, Elias replied, pulling out a legal pad and a gold fountain pen. We are going to build an inescapable federal cage. Financial fraud on this massive scale involves interstate commerce and wire transfers. That makes it a federal jurisdiction. If we present this evidence to the police, now DeAndre's expensive defense attorneys will tie the case up in state court for years. But if we wait until your scheduled divorce settlement hearing, we can force DeAndre to take the stand under oath in a federal bankruptcy proceeding regarding your company's frozen assets. Elias began drawing a complex flowchart on the yellow paper. I want him to testify under oath about the shell company. I want him to swear on a Bible that he has no knowledge of the missing funds. I want him to confidently lie to a federal judge about Terrence's crash. Once he commits federal perjury on the record, the FBI gets involved directly. Federal authorities have the immediate power to freeze global offshore accounts and revoke passports without warning. They will lock down every single penny before he even has the chance to realize he has been caught. I stared at the flowchart, my mind racing to process the trap Elias was designing. But what about Terrence? I asked, my voice trembling. He is lying in a hospital bed, completely exposed. If DeAndre realizes Terrence might wake up, he will go back to Grady Memorial and finish the job. We cannot leave him there. Elias nodded grimly, clicking his pen closed. You are absolutely right. DeAndre thinks he possesses the only copy of this dashcam footage. He believes Terrence is permanently silenced by a coma. We need to ensure DeAndre continues to believe he has won a flawless victory. To do that, we have to make Terrence disappear entirely, and you have to play the role of the defeated, helpless victim. Playing the victim was the absolute last thing I wanted to do. I had spent my entire adult life building my reputation as a fiercely independent business owner. The thought of letting my abusive husband believe he had broken me made my blood boil with sheer indignation, but as I looked at the dark screen of the laptop, remembering the dead look in DeAndre's eyes as he cut those brake lines, I knew Elias was right. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I was playing a high-stakes game for my survival, and the only way to win was to let my enemy think I had already surrendered. The extraction of Terrence from Grady Memorial required absolute precision and a terrifying amount of money, which Elias possessed in abundance. Later that afternoon, Elias utilized his extensive network of medical and legal contacts to secure a sudden emergency court order. By citing a catastrophic lapse in Jasmine's medical insurance coverage, which Elias had quietly engineered through a legal loophole in her policy, the hospital was legally forced to transfer Terrence to a long-term state care facility. When Jasmine received the automated notification about the transfer, she did not fight it. In fact, she welcomed it. A state hospice facility was the perfect dumping ground for a husband she no longer wanted. She signed the transfer authorization papers digitally, without even visiting the hospital, eager to wash her hands of the man whose life she had helped destroy. But Terrence never went to a state hospice. The moment his ambulance pulled away from the loading docks of Grady Memorial, it was intercepted by a private medical transport team Elias had hired. Under the strict cover of darkness, Terrence was rerouted to a highly exclusive, heavily guarded neurorehabilitation clinic 3 hours away in North Carolina. He was admitted under a secure John Doe alias. Elias personally fronted the massive monthly medical bills, assuring me that we would recoup every single dollar from DeAndre's seized assets once the trap was finally sprung. With Terrence safely hidden away receiving top-tier neurological care, the hardest part of the plan began. I had to disappear into the miserable, pathetic role DeAndre had written for me. I moved into the cheap, run-down motel downtown, where DeAndre had callously shipped my personal belongings. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and mildew. The neon sign outside my window buzzed aggressively all night long, casting a sickly red glow over my cramped living space. It was a massive, humiliating fall from my luxurious estate in Buckhead, but I embraced the misery. I needed DeAndre to believe I was entirely broken. Over the next 4 months, I orchestrated a masterful performance of total defeat. I stopped fighting the temporary restraining order. I completely abandoned my efforts to unfreeze my public relations firm's operating accounts. I let the business I had built from the ground up slowly wither and die in the public eye. When industry magazines wrote articles about the sudden, shocking collapse of my agency, I refused to comment. When former clients called my cell phone demanding explanations, I let the calls go straight to voicemail. I made sure to be seen in the absolute worst possible condition whenever I knew DeAndre's private investigators were watching me. Elias had warned me that DeAndre would undoubtedly hire someone to tail me, just to ensure I was not secretly building a legal defense. So, I gave them exactly what they wanted to see. I wore the same baggy sweatpants for days. I walked to the local discount grocery store with my head hung low, my hair unwashed and messy. I purposefully let my credit cards decline at the checkout counter, staging loud, embarrassing arguments with the cashiers, while the investigators snapped photos from their parked cars across the street. The strategy worked flawlessly. Through Elias, I received copies of the legal briefs DeAndre's attorney was filing in family court. The documents painted a picture of a woman completely unhinged, bankrupt, and mentally incapable of participating in a complex financial trial. DeAndre was using my staged poverty as absolute proof that he had been right all along, that I was irresponsible and fully deserving of losing my empire. Behind closed doors, however, Elias and I were working relentlessly. We spent hundreds of hours in his secure conference room, meticulously tracing the flow of the stolen money through various international banking channels. We mapped out every single connection between Apex Heritage Holdings and the Lucas Heritage Trust. We built a mountain of irrefutable, devastating evidence, all while DeAndre continued to flaunt his stolen wealth in Atlanta high society. Jasmine and DeAndre had become increasingly brazen. Tasha occasionally posted photos on her social media showing Jasmine driving my cars and attending lavish parties at my Buckhead estate. They were living their absolute dream life, completely convinced they had gotten away with the perfect crime. They believed I was rotting away in a cheap motel, crying myself to sleep every night over the husband I had lost. They had absolutely no idea that I was not crying. I was simply waiting for the perfect moment. I was sharpening the blade of their impending destruction, counting down the days until the upcoming federal settlement hearing where DeAndre would confidently walk into the courtroom, place his right hand on a Bible and seal his own absolute doom. 4 months of suffocating patience finally culminated on a crisp Tuesday morning in the imposing federal courthouse of downtown Atlanta. The courtroom was a sprawling theater of polished mahogany, high vaulted ceilings, and stern, unforgiving fluorescent lighting that cast long shadows across the wooden benches. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Elias Cole, wearing a simple, understated charcoal dress that I had bought specifically for this occasion from a discount rack. I kept my posture rigid, my shoulders slumped slightly forward, and my eyes downcast, playing the part of the broken, defeated woman, right up until the final curtain call. Across the wide center aisle, DeAndre looked like he was about to step onto the cover of a wealthy lifestyle magazine. He wore a custom-tailored navy blue Tom Ford suit, a crisp French cuff shirt, and a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He exuded an aura of absolute invincibility, chatting casually with his lawyer, as if they were discussing golf scores instead of a brutal divorce settlement. Sitting in the gallery directly behind him was Jasmine, wearing a designer cream-colored pantsuit and the exact same diamond tennis bracelet my stolen money had purchased. She crossed her legs and offered me a condescending, pitying smile when our eyes briefly met across the room. I looked away quickly, letting her enjoy her final moments of manufactured superiority. Tasha was sitting 2 rows behind Jasmine, busy filing her acrylic nails, completely unbothered by the gravity of the federal proceedings happening just feet away from her. They were all completely complicit in this charade, acting as a unified front of deceit. The federal judge, a no-nonsense man named Harrison, known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding courtroom theatrics, called the settlement hearing to order with a sharp crack of his wooden gavel. DeAndre's attorney Arthur immediately called his client to the stand. DeAndre strode confidently across the courtroom. He placed his right hand firmly on the heavy leather-bound Bible, looked the bailiff directly in the eyes, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The sheer audacity of his vow made my stomach churn violently, but Elias simply tapped his gold pen against his legal pad, his face an unreadable stony mask. Arthur began the direct examination with a series of soft, sympathetic questions deliberately designed to paint my husband as a victim of my supposed mental collapse. DeAndre leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with practiced, sorrowful reluctance. "Your Honor, I never wanted it to come to this," DeAndre testified, looking respectfully up at the judge with wide, sincere eyes. "I deeply love my wife. But over the past year, the intense stress of running her public relations firm completely fractured her mental state. She became highly erratic, intensely paranoid, and began making massive, unauthorized cash withdrawals from our joint business operating accounts." Arthur paced slowly in front of the witness stand, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "And Mr. Brooks, could you explain to the court why you felt compelled to initiate a total freeze on those accounts, leaving your wife without access to her company funds?" DeAndre sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead as if the memory deeply pained him. "I am a licensed wealth manager by trade, Your Honor. It is my fiduciary duty to protect family assets from catastrophic loss. I discovered that Naya was actively embezzling corporate funds, transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars to unknown, unregulated offshore entities. When I confronted her about the missing money, she suffered a complete psychotic break. She drove to my brother's architectural firm in the middle of the night, shattered a window, and broke in, leading to her immediate arrest by the Atlanta police. I had to freeze the accounts and seek a restraining order to protect her from destroying our entire financial portfolio while she refuses to seek psychiatric help." He spoke with such conviction, such smooth, calculated sincerity, that anyone sitting in the gallery who did not know the truth would have believed every single word falling from his mouth. He expertly flipped the entire narrative, claiming my missing $250,000 was my own doing. He painted my desperate midnight break-in to recover the hidden flash drive as the chaotic, nonsensical actions of a mentally unstable woman attempting to hide her fraudulent tracks. Arthur concluded his questioning by submitting my arrest record and the frozen account statements into evidence, legally cementing the illusion that I was a dangerous criminal and a massive financial liability. DeAndre leaned back in the heavy wooden witness chair, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, looking incredibly satisfied with his flawless performance. He had set the stage perfectly. He had legally established his false narrative on the federal record. Arthur thanked his client politely and took his seat, leaving DeAndre sitting on the stand, practically glowing with arrogance. Elias Cole slowly stood up from our table. He deliberately buttoned his suit jacket, picked up a thin, unmarked manila folder, and walked toward the center of the courtroom. The air in the room seemed to suddenly grow incredibly heavy. "Mr. Brooks." Elias began, his voice calm, polite, and dangerously quiet. "You have just testified under oath that you froze the marital accounts solely to protect your wife's business from her own erratic embezzlement. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is absolutely correct," DeAndre answered smoothly, completely unfazed by Elias's intimidating reputation in the legal community. Elias nodded slowly, opening the thin manila folder and studying a single sheet of paper. "Are you familiar with a corporate shell entity registered in the state of Delaware under the name Apex Heritage Holdings?" DeAndre's confident smile faltered for a microscopic fraction of a second. It was so fast the judge completely missed it, but I saw it perfectly. It was the tiny, involuntary flinch of an arrogant man unknowingly stepping directly onto a hidden landmine. "No, I am not familiar with that company at all," DeAndre replied, forcing his voice to remain entirely steady. Elias paced slowly in front of the jury box, his eyes locked onto DeAndre. "That is very interesting, Mr. Brooks. Because federal banking records subpoenaed directly from your private terminal indicate that the exact sum of $250,000, which you just accused my client of embezzling, was wired directly from her operating account into the primary holding account of Apex Heritage Holdings. And you claim to have absolutely no knowledge of this massive transfer." "None whatsoever." DeAndre lied smoothly, locking his eyes with Elias in a battle of wills. "My wife handled all the outgoing vendor payments for her agency. If she sent our money there, you would have to ask her why she did it." Elias turned the page in his folder with a sharp flick of his wrist. "Very well. Let us talk about your family dynamics. You are currently seeking full control of the marital estate to ensure financial stability. How would you describe your personal relationship with your sister-in-law, Jasmine?" DeAndre shifted his weight uncomfortably in the heavy wooden chair. He glanced quickly at Jasmine in the gallery before looking back at Elias. "We are simply family. My brother Terrence was involved in a tragic, catastrophic car accident several months ago. I have just been providing emotional and financial support to his grieving wife and young child during a very difficult time." Elias stopped pacing abruptly and looked directly into DeAndre's eyes. "Just emotional and financial support. There is no romantic or physical relationship between you and Jasmine." Arthur immediately jumped to his feet, slamming his hand on his table. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This is a financial settlement hearing regarding corporate assets, not a cheap daytime soap opera." The judge looked down at Elias with a stern expression. "Counsel, where exactly are you going with this line of questioning?" Elias did not break eye contact with DeAndre for a single second. "It goes directly to the underlying motive for the massive financial fraud, Your Honor. I will connect it immediately." The judge nodded slowly. "Overruled. You may answer the question, Mr. Brooks." DeAndre's jaw tightened visibly. The thick veins in his neck began to pulse against his crisp white collar. "No," he stated firmly. "I absolutely do not have a physical relationship with my brother's wife. That is a disgusting, entirely baseless accusation designed to humiliate my family." Elias wrote something down on his legal pad with deliberate slowness. "Let the federal record reflect the witness's denial. Now, Mr. Brooks, let us discuss the Lucas Heritage Trust. Are you the primary benefactor covertly funding this irrevocable trust?" DeAndre gripped the wooden armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "No. That is a private family trust established for my nephew's education. I do not fund it. You did not forge your wife's signature to authorize massive commercial loans against my client's public relations firm in order to covertly funnel millions of dollars into this specific trust." Elias asked, his voice rapidly rising in volume, the steel trap finally snapping shut. "Absolutely not!" DeAndre snapped, genuine anger finally breaking through his highly polished veneer. "Those loans were taken out by Nia. She forged my signature to try and frame me when she realized her business was failing due to her incompetence. It is all a pathetic, desperate lie." Elias took a menacing step closer to the witness stand. The tension in the courtroom was now wound so incredibly tight it was almost impossible to breathe. "Let us move to the night of your brother Terrence's tragic accident," Elias said, his tone suddenly dropping to an icy, terrifying whisper. "You testified earlier that you were entirely devastated by his sudden crash. Where exactly were you between the hours of 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock that afternoon prior to the family Sunday dinner?" DeAndre scoffed loudly, looking at the judge as if Elias was wasting the court's valuable time. "I was inside my mother's house. I was watching the football game in the living room. I never left the house." "Did you at any point enter the detached garage where Terrence had parked his vehicle?" Elias pressed his eyes, narrowing into dark, predatory slits. "No," DeAndre answered, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Did you carry a canvas tool bag into that garage, lie down underneath your brother's vehicle, and manually sever his brake lines with heavy wire cutters?" Elias asked. The terrifying question dropped into the silent courtroom like a massive explosive bomb. The entire gallery gasped collectively. Jasmine jumped up from her seat in the back row, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. Arthur shouted another frantic, panicked objection, but DeAndre was too completely enraged to let his lawyer speak. "That is absolutely insane," DeAndre roared, leaning aggressively forward in the witness chair, his finger pointing directly at Elias. "I never touched his car. I was inside the house the entire day. You are grasping at straws, trying to blame me for a drunk driving accident to save your criminal client. Do you swear under penalty of federal perjury that you did not cut those brake lines?" Elias demanded, his voice booming like thunder through the expansive room. "I swear it!" DeAndre shouted back, his face flushed dark red with absolute fury. "I swear on my life I never touched that car." Elias Cole slowly closed his manila folder. The ruthless, terrifying smile of a seasoned federal prosecutor finally broke across his face. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," Elias said softly. "Your Honor." At this time, the plaintiff would like to call our final witness to the stand. Judge Harrison frowned, peering down over his wire-rimmed glasses at the official docket on his desk. He adjusted his heavy black robes and looked back up at Elias with a stern, deeply skeptical expression. "Counsel, there are no further witnesses listed on the approved pre-trial discovery roster. We have already concluded the designated testimonies for this financial hearing." Arthur jumped to his feet immediately, his face red with indignation, nearly knocking his leather chair over in his haste. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant, highly inappropriate ambush. Plaintiff's counsel is blatantly attempting to turn a standard civil asset division into a theatrical circus to distract from his client's own documented financial crimes. We strongly oppose any unlisted, surprise witnesses taking the stand today." Elias remained perfectly still, his posture radiating absolute, unshakable authority. "Your Honor." Elias said, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly across the vast wood-paneled room. "The witness I am calling is directly tied to the newly established claims of federal perjury that Mr. Brooks just willfully committed on the stand. Furthermore, this witness is the true legal victim of the massive financial fraud regarding the Lucas Heritage Trust. His testimony will provide immediate, irrefutable clarity regarding the origin and destination of the embezzled funds." Judge Harrison stared at Elias for a long, calculating moment. He knew Elias Cole's reputation well. A former federal prosecutor simply did not play careless, dramatic games in a federal courtroom unless he had an absolute, undeniable checkmate in his hands. The judge slowly lowered his wooden gavel, his expression hardening. "I will allow it, Mr. Cole. But this witness better be exactly as crucial as you claim, or I will hold you in direct contempt of court and fine you heavily. Bailiff, please bring in the final witness." The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom remained closed for 10 agonizing seconds. The silence in the room was so thick and absolute that I could hear the rapid, panicked ticking of Arthur's expensive gold wristwatch from the defense table. The gallery held its collective breath, anticipating who could possibly walk through those doors to challenge DeAndre's flawless narrative. Then, the polished brass handles slowly turned downward. The heavy doors swung open outward, hitting the rubber wall stoppers with a soft, muffled thud that felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. The rhythmic metallic squeak of a medical wheelchair echoed sharply against the polished marble floor. A specialized neurotrauma nurse dressed in crisp clinical navy blue scrubs slowly pushed the heavy mechanical chair through the threshold and into the harsh fluorescent light of the center aisle. Sitting slumped but dignified in that chair was a man who the entire Brooks family believed was locked away in a permanent vegetative state until the end of his natural life. It was Terrence. He looked drastically different from the strong, vibrant architect who used to effortlessly command chaotic construction sites and demanding boardrooms. He had lost at least 40 pounds during his grueling, secretive recovery. His cheekbones jutted out sharply against his sunken, pale skin. A deep, angry red scar tracked aggressively along the right side of his shaved skull, a brutal, undeniable reminder of the emergency craniotomy that had narrowly saved his life on the horrific night of the crash. He was dressed meticulously in a tailored charcoal suit, the very same suit he had proudly worn to his own wedding to Jasmine, but the expensive fabric now hung loosely and awkwardly over his diminished, fragile frame. A thin, transparent oxygen tube rested delicately beneath his nose, delivering steady breaths, and a small, specialized electronic voice device was strapped securely around his throat, pressing directly against his damaged vocal cords. Despite his profound physical frailty, Terrence was absolutely not broken. As the nurse wheeled him closer to the front of the courtroom, the rubber wheels making a slow, deliberate sound on the marble, I looked directly into his eyes. They were not cloudy, confused, or vacant like the hospital doctors had originally predicted. They were incredibly sharp, completely alert, and burning with a fierce, righteous anger that immediately commanded the attention of the entire room. He was a man who had literally crawled back from the dark, terrifying edge of the grave to deliver ultimate justice to the people who had buried him. My chest tightened with overwhelming emotion, my hands trembling violently as I gripped the hard edge of the plaintiff's table. I knew Elias had quietly moved him to the highly secure neurorehabilitation facility in North Carolina, and I knew he was receiving top-tier cognitive therapy around the clock. But Elias had purposefully kept me in the absolute dark about the exact extent of his physical recovery, insisting that my reactions in front of DeAndre needed to remain entirely genuine to sell the deception. Seeing him awake, sitting upright, and ready to fight brought hot, stinging tears of vindication to my eyes. I wanted to run across the room and hug him to tell him how sorry I was, but I stayed perfectly still, watching the nightmare finally unfold for the people who had ruthlessly destroyed us both. As the wheelchair came to a complete stop just a few feet away from the elevated witness stand, the psychological breakdown of the villains happened in spectacular, simultaneous slow motion. In the second row of the crowded gallery, Jasmine completely stopped breathing. She was staring at Terrence with wide, unblinking eyes, acting as if an actual, terrifying ghost had just materialized from the floorboards to drag her to hell. The custom cream-colored designer handbag she had been clutching so proudly just moments before slipped right through her perfectly manicured, trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, heavy thud, spilling expensive cosmetics across the floor. The arrogant, condescending smile she had worn all morning was instantly wiped away, replaced entirely by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. All the blood completely drained from her face, leaving her once radiant skin a sickly ashen gray. She gripped the wooden pew in front of her, her knuckles turning bone white, desperately trying to stand up and flee the room, but her knees violently buckled under her own weight. She collapsed heavily back onto the hard wooden bench, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a suffocating fish as she stared at the loyal husband she had cruelly betrayed and discarded. 2 rows behind her, Tasha was equally paralyzed by the shocking revelation. The metal nail file she had been obnoxiously using to groom herself just moments before clattered loudly to the ground, bouncing under the benches. Her jaw literally unhinged, hanging wide open as she stared at her oldest brother in pure disbelief. All of her loud, brash confidence built entirely on my stolen money evaporated into thin air. Beside her, Mama Estelle let out a sudden piercing gasp that sounded like she was physically choking on a lack of oxygen. She clutched the expensive silk fabric over her chest, her eyes wide with overwhelming shock and profound confusion. Terrence's Mama Estelle shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing wildly across the vaulted ceiling. "My baby, you are awake! You!" But as she frantically started to push past Tasha to run toward the center aisle, she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. The horrific realization of what Elias Cole had just asked DeAndre about the deliberately cut brake lines hit her brain like a physical blow. She looked from Terrence's heavily scarred, frail body directly to DeAndre sitting frozen on the witness stand, her lifelong maternal delusion violently clashing with the terrifying, undeniable reality of her youngest son's murderous actions. But the most magnificent, incredibly satisfying collapse belonged entirely to DeAndre. Up on the elevated witness stand, the man who had just sworn on a holy Bible that he was entirely innocent underwent a total, catastrophic psychological disintegration. His impeccable, confident posture crumbled instantly. The smug, untouchable smirk that he had worn like impenetrable armor for his entire life dissolved into pure, sheer panic. He gripped the polished wooden railing of the witness box so aggressively that I genuinely thought the thick wood might snap under the immense pressure of his hands. A thick, visible sheen of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, ruining his flawless, camera-ready appearance. His chest began to heave violently as he openly hyperventilated, his eyes darting frantically between Terrence's cold, unforgiving stare and the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom, desperately calculating an escape route that simply did not exist. DeAndre realized in that exact crushing second that he had not successfully killed his brother. He realized Terrence had survived the horrific crash, had miraculously retained his memories of the betrayal, and had clearly communicated everything to Elias Cole. He realized he had just committed multiple counts of federal perjury on a recorded government transcript, and there was absolutely no way out of the trap he had confidently walked into. Even Arthur DeAndre's aggressive, highly paid defense attorney realized his wealthy client was now completely radioactive. Arthur looked at the frail man breathing through an oxygen tube in the wheelchair, looked down at his own meticulously prepared legal notes, and physically took 3 large steps backward, actively distancing himself from DeAndre. He knew his client had just brazenly lied to a federal judge about a violent felony, and as an officer of the court, he wanted absolutely no part of the impending catastrophic criminal fallout. The sheer shock of the impossible moment finally broke, and the entire courtroom erupted into absolute, unmanageable chaos. Reporters sitting in the back rows began shouting rapid-fire questions and furiously typing breaking news updates on their phones. Members of the gallery stood up, pointing fingers and murmuring loudly about the scandalous turn of events. Mama Estelle started sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands and leaning heavily against Tasha, who looked like she was going to be physically sick right there in the pew. DeAndre tried to speak, opening his mouth to formulate another manipulative lie, but only a pathetic, breathless, stammering sound came out. He was completely, utterly broken. "Order!" Judge Harrison bellowed, his face turning bright red with righteous fury. He raised his heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down violently against his desk over and over again. The sharp, cracking sounds cut through the chaotic noise like rapid gunfire. "Order in my courtroom right now! I will have the bailiffs clear this entire gallery and hold you all in contempt if you do not sit down and remain completely silent." The harsh, booming threat worked immediately. The shouting slowly died down, replaced by a tense, highly electric silence that made the air feel incredibly heavy. Judge Harrison glared fiercely at Arthur and DeAndre before slowly turning his undivided attention to the fragile man sitting in the wheelchair. Mr. Cole, the judge, said, his voice deadly serious and completely stripped of any prior skepticism. "Is this surprise witness physically and mentally competent to provide sworn testimony in my courtroom today?" Elias Cole stood incredibly tall, calmly smoothing the front of his expensive suit jacket. He looked directly at DeAndre's terrified, sweat-drenched face and smiled a cold, ruthless smile that promised absolute destruction. "He is more than competent." "Your Honor," Elias replied, his voice ringing with undeniable victory. "He is ready to tell you exactly what his brother did to him." "Oh." The bailiff stepped forward, looking uncertainly at the complex medical equipment surrounding the witness, and asked Terence to raise his right hand. Terence slowly lifted his trembling, scarred hand into the air. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked, his voice echoing in the massive, silent room. Terence lowered his hand and pressed a thick finger against the small electronic device strapped tightly to his throat. A mechanical synthesized voice projected clearly and loudly across the federal courtroom. "I do." Elias Cole approached the stand with a gentle, respectful demeanor that starkly contrasted with his usual aggressive courtroom tactics. "Terence, can you please tell the court exactly what you discovered on the evening of October 12th? The robotic, emotionless cadence of Terence's artificial voice somehow made his devastating testimony even more chilling to witness. "I found a hidden prepaid burner phone inside my brother's coat pocket," Terence stated flatly. "It contained recent text messages from my wife Jasmine. They were actively discussing their long-term affair. They were confirming that my young son Lucas was actually fathered by DeAndre." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the remaining gallery. The reporters in the back row began typing furiously. Elias held up a hand to maintain order before the judge could strike his gavel. "What else did you discover later that night, when you went to your architectural office?" Elias asked, his eyes sweeping across the jury box to ensure everyone was paying absolute attention. Terence blinked slowly, his sharp, intelligent eyes never leaving DeAndre's sweating, terrified face. "I hacked into Jasmine's secure cloud computer drive. I found the official incorporation documents for a shell company named Apex Heritage Holdings. I found the bank routing numbers in spreadsheets, proving DeAndre was systematically draining Nia's public relations firm. He was personally using forged signatures to funnel her business capital into a hidden, irrevocable trust fund for his illegitimate son. He explicitly planned to leave my sister-in-law completely bankrupt and permanently destroy her professional reputation so she could never fight him in court." Elias nodded grimly and walked back to our plaintiff table. He picked up the small silver solid-state hard drive I had retrieved from the midnight break-in and held it up high for the judge to see. "Your Honor, this physical drive contains the exact financial blueprints Mr. Brooks created to execute his massive corporate fraud, but it contains something far more sinister than stolen money." Elias turned back to the witness. "Terence, please tell the court what happened when you tried to drive to Nia's house to warn her about this criminal conspiracy." Terence's mechanical voice carried a heavy, devastating weight that filled every corner of the room. "I called Nia to warn her. While I was on the phone, I tried to slow down at a busy intersection. The brake pedal went completely loose, falling flat to the floorboard. The hydraulic lines had been manually severed. I crashed into a solid concrete embankment at 90 miles per hour and was trapped inside the crushing metal." Elias approached the judge's elevated bench, handing the silver drive directly to the court clerk. "Your Honor, this drive also contains high-definition, cloud-synced dashcam footage recovered directly from the victim's vehicle. It clearly shows the defendant, DeAndre Brooks, sliding under the car with heavy wire cutters just hours before the catastrophic crash. He intentionally sabotaged the vehicle to murder his own brother and permanently silence the only living witness to his massive financial crimes." Judge Harrison stared at the silver drive resting on his desk, then turned his gaze slowly toward DeAndre. The judge's face transformed into a mask of absolute, unforgiving judicial wrath. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, authoritative register that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I have sat on this federal bench for 22 years, and I have rarely witnessed such a profound, calculated display of pure, unadulterated evil. You have sat in my courtroom today and committed blatant perjury under oath. You have utilized the federal banking system to execute a massive, coordinated financial attack against your own wife. And you have violently attempted to murder your own flesh and blood to cover your tracks." Arthur DeAndre's highly paid defense lawyer frantically began shoving his legal pads and expensive pens into his leather briefcase. He was completely abandoning his client right there at the defense table. DeAndre opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate an excuse, but only a pathetic, breathless whine escaped his lips. He looked exactly like a cornered rat, realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. Judge Harrison struck his heavy wooden gavel with absolute deafening finality. I am immediately lifting the financial injunction and unfreezing all operating accounts belonging to the plaintiff's public relations firm. Furthermore, I am revoking your bail effectively immediately. You are considered a severe flight risk and an extreme imminent danger to society. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open violently. 4 men in dark suits wearing official FBI windbreakers stepped aggressively into the center aisle. Elias had completely coordinated this precise timing with the federal authorities, providing them with decrypted copies of the hard drive evidence hours before the settlement hearing even began. The lead federal agent marched straight past the stunned gallery, ignoring Mama Estelle, who was now weeping hysterically and pulling at her hair, and approached the witness stand. DeAndre Brooks, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft perjury, and the attempted murder of Terrence Brooks, the agent declared loudly, his voice echoing with absolute authority. DeAndre collapsed to his knees right there inside the wooden witness box. He started sobbing uncontrollably, the ugly, loud cries of a broken man. He begged his mother to help him. He begged Terrence to forgive him. He even looked across the room at me, pleading with his eyes for the mercy he had never once shown me. The arrogant, untouchable wealth manager who had promised to leave me with nothing but dirty clothes was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, crying coward. The federal agents hauled him roughly to his feet without a shred of sympathy, snapping heavy steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. As they dragged DeAndre down the center aisle, 2 more federal agents quickly approached the gallery. They stopped right in front of the second row. Jasmine screamed in absolute terror and tried to scramble backward over the wooden pews, kicking her designer heels in the air. The agents reached over the bench and grabbed her arms, firmly pulling her upright. Jasmine Brooks. Jasmine, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and federal tax evasion, the agent stated coldly. He locked the heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists, the cold metal pressing brutally against the expensive diamond tennis bracelet she had bought with my stolen money. Tasha screamed loudly, pulling away from Jasmine, as if her sister-in-law were suddenly infected with a deadly disease. They paraded both DeAndre and Jasmine out of the courtroom in heavy chains, their luxurious lives completely and permanently destroyed by their own toxic greed. 1 year later, the air inside my newly renovated Buckhead estate smelled richly of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and absolute freedom. The toxic, suffocating shadows that once haunted these massive halls had been completely washed away. My public relations firm had not just recovered from the freeze, it had absolutely skyrocketed. The highly publicized federal trial had inadvertently given my agency massive national exposure, and top-tier celebrity clients were practically breaking down my doors to hire the brilliant strategist who had single-handedly outsmarted a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. I walked into the grand dining room carrying a massive silver tray of roasted vegetables and perfectly seared steaks. The long oak table was set beautifully with crystal and fine china, but the guests sitting around it were entirely different from the people who used to occupy those seats. Elias Cole was sitting comfortably at the head of the table, laughing warmly and pouring expensive Cabernet into the glasses. He had completely transitioned from my ruthless defense attorney to one of my closest business mentors and fiercest personal friends. Sitting directly across from him was Terrence. He was no longer confined to a medical wheelchair. He walked with a sleek silver cane and had gained all of his healthy weight back. His vocal cords were slowly healing through intense daily therapy, allowing him to speak in a quiet, raspy voice without relying on the electronic machine. He had swiftly filed for a brutal divorce, gained full legal custody of his architectural firm, and completely cut his toxic mother and his leeching sister Tasha out of his life forever. DeAndre was currently serving a 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Jasmine was serving 5 hard years for her active role in the financial conspiracy, and her son was living quietly with her parents out of state. I set the hot food down on the table and looked at the genuinely smiling, happy faces around my dining room. This was my real family. I had learned the absolute hardest lesson a person can ever learn in this life. Blood simply does not make you family. Shared genetics do not guarantee love. Unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and unconditional protection are the only things that make you family. When the people who are supposed to love you the most actively try to bury you alive, you do not sit down in the dirt and let them throw the shovel. You claw your way out of the darkness, you silently gather your undeniable evidence, and you build a massive fortress they can never touch. If you are watching this video right now and you are currently drowning in the manipulation of a toxic family environment, let my survival story be your absolute undeniable proof that you can walk away. You can reclaim your stolen life, you can rebuild your finances, and you can fiercely protect your peace. You do not owe your abusers your silence, and you certainly do not owe them your loyalty. Hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below with your own story of surviving toxic family members, and never ever let them dim your beautiful light. The most powerful lesson from Nia's story is the importance of self-control and the strength to set boundaries. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect, loyalty, and genuine love. When those who are supposed to be family become the ones who betray, manipulate, and push you to the edge out of greed, you have every right to walk away. Never let the label of family trap you in abuse. True victory isn't about loud revenge. It's about staying calm, claiming your justice, and building a beautiful life with those who truly deserve to be in it. Have you ever had the courage to set boundaries with your own family to protect your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more powerful journeys of resilience and rising above.